this evening. So so let me just tell you kind of the origin of this particular class. It came from people saying that Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg wasn't Jewish enough. And it was a criticism that, you know, if you didn't like her opinions, you were not possibly smart enough to argue with her, because the odds were pretty good is that she was smarter than you, gave it more thought, and was smarter than you. So her opponents would then attack her as she wasn't Jewish enough. And I don't even understand what that means, what it means to be Jewish enough. So that was kind of the origins of this. I do want to show you a couple things. One of my daughters bought me this. It's a micrography of all her dissenting opinions. So it's I don't know if you can see with the glare, but it's a portrait of her, but it's done with teeny little letters with her dissenting opinions. And dissent, first of all, which I think is actually a key part of being Jewish. Dissent means disagreement in a civil way, and disagreement based on the facts and not just attacking people. And I have my Ruth Bader Ginsburg action figure here too. I keep one in my office at the synagogue as well. She's always, if you ever see me on Zoom from my office, she is always looking over my shoulder.
Yeah. And
so and it is an action figure. It's not a doll. Action figure. Okay. So, but this is wonderful. I think you can still get them, but I keep it on my desk when I work, and she's always kind of staring at me no matter where I work. I am not an expert on her, and I am not an expert on the law, right? I went to Jewish law school, which means I can sue someone from 1200 years ago, but it doesn't really, I'm not an authority on the law. I'm not an authority on her. I've read about her a lot. I think about her, but I'm an enthusiast. I'm a fan. I am coming at this from deep respect. I'm going to try very hard not to mansplain her. I'm also, aware that it potentially can be a thing. So I'm going to try to really just present her own words as much as possible. So I have some videos that I chose, which she talks about her Jewish identity, how important that it is to her. And tomorrow is International Holocaust Memorial Day, so we're going to share some of the words that she's shared about the Holocaust and Holocaust Memorial Day. And it's also coming up on the anniversary of Roe v. Wade. And she actually had some surprising to me, but extremely interesting opinions about Roe v. Wade. And I'll just share some of those as well, just to give a sense of how she thought about things and how deeply she thought about things. I will tell you that women's reproductive rights were exceedingly important to her. So when you see her surprising, I think, approaches to Roe v. Wade, you'll understand that it's coming from a place of wanting to ensure rights, not to undermine them, because people have tried to, I think, misuse her words in some ways. So I thought I would share a couple of documents that she wrote about being Jewish, and then I'll share some YouTube videos which I found very moving. There is a lot of her on YouTube. There are lectures that she gave that go for an hour, hour and a half, interviews, and they're all interesting and they're all worth listening to. I just happen to have picked a few that really mostly address her issues of being Jewish and issues of anti-Semitism. Ruth Bader Ginsburg is far too large an intellect to fit into 1 hour. So I'm just trying to give a taste, some of the things that I appreciated. But again, it really came out of these attacks on her over the last several years of her life from people who disagreed with her in the Jewish community, who said she wasn't Jewish enough. And I think you'll see that they were, let's see, was it completely wrong, completely and totally wrong. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not going to say anything beyond that, but I'll give you a sense of that. I have a whole bunch of these documents. So do you see the one where, did it come up, what being Jewish means to me? Okay, good. So Jody, you'll just tell me if it comes up or not. And I got a thumbs up on that. As you can see, this was in the New York Times in 1996. So this is already going back well before she became a justice. And she writes, there is an age-old connection between Judaism and law. For centuries, rabbis and other Jewish scholars have studied, restudied, and ceaselessly interpreted the Talmud. These studies have produced a vast corpus of juridical writing. Jews have been called the people of the book, reflecting their placement of learning first among cultural values. The Jewish tradition prized the scholarship of judges and lawyers, and when anti-Semitic occupational restrictions were lifted, Jews were drawn to the learned professions of the countries in which they lived. In the United States, law became a bulwark against the kind of oppression Jews had endured in many lands and for countless generations. Jews in large numbers became lawyers, some eventually became judges, and the best of those jurists used the law to secure justice for others. Laws as protectors of the oppressed, the poor, the loner is evident in the work of my Jewish predecessors on the Supreme Court. The biblical command, justice, justice shalt thou pursue, is a strand that ties them together. I keep those words on the wall of my chambers as an ever-present reminder of what judges must do that they may thrive. The late Supreme Court Justice and former American Jewish Committee President Arthur Goldberg once said, "My concern for justice, for peace, for enlightenment, all stem from my heritage. I am linked," sorry, hit the wrong button. Just letting someone in. I am fortunate to be linked to that heritage. Each time I visit the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, I am reminded that Hitler's evil kingdom, his Holocaust kingdom, was a kingdom full of laws. Leading jurists from Germany's highly educated legal community willingly assisted in drafting the laws of the Third Reich. After serving as draftsmen, those jurists shunned the human consequences of the new laws by retreating into a heartless professionalism. They were, by their accounts, simply serving and enforcing law and order. We must learn from that dreadful past and strive to ensure against its repetition. In bad times and oppressive societies, our humanity should cause us to hold fast to our human decency, so that never, in the service of political leaders, will we administer laws that deny the humanity or the human dignity of others. I am a judge, born, raised, and proud of being a Jew. The demand for justice runs through the entirety of the Jewish tradition. I hope in my years on the bench of the Supreme Court of the United States, I will have the strength and courage to remain constant in the service of that demand. And I thought that this was just so powerful. And just, anyone again who said she didn't really understand what it meant to be Jewish, I was like, yeah, I kind of think she did. And she had, that quote is from Pirkei, is from the Torah of justice, justice you will pursue. But also the phrase Holocaust kingdom, that's Elie Wiesel. He's the one who originally coined that phrase. And to give you a sense of this, I thought was just was very, very powerful. And again, this was written 25 years ago. I just wanted to really put out there that her sense of what it meant to be a Jew was to pursue justice, and she got that value from the Torah. And she quotes the Torah. She could have quoted Socrates, she could have quoted Aristotle, she could have quoted a lot of other law codes, but she chose, and the first, only the second woman to become a Supreme Court justice, and the first Jewish woman. By the way, if you have any questions or anything, please put them in chat or send them to Jody. I think with a group this size, it's going to be hard to have an actual conversation. But I really wanted to bring this up. I thought it was very powerful. By the way, you may have heard that one of the Jewish Supreme Court justices is going to be retiring, Judge Breyer, and I hope that the process will be peaceful and kind. I think that we need to have faith in the Supreme Court. I think that was very important to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and that part of her friendship with Antonin Scalia is, though they were diametrically opposed ideologically, they still found a way to talk to each other, which is no small thing. Let me just see. Did it say a national commemoration of days of remembrance? Okay, great. So this is talking about the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, and this. So one of the things that I just want to put out there for a moment is that tomorrow is International Holocaust Memorial Day, as declared by the United Nations, and it's based on the liberation of Auschwitz. That was the day they picked. It is not observed in Israel. Yom HaShoah is based on the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and there's actually a conceptual difference. What the United Nations declared was the liberation of Jews by others. The Yom HaShoah, the one that we observe and in Israel they observe in a more religious way, is the of self-liberation. So I have kind of mixed feelings about International Holocaust Memorial Day. I'm very glad they do it because any commemoration is good, but it's linked to Jewish powerlessness, where Yom HaShoah is linked to Jewish self-determination. And I really wish that the United Nations had honored what the Jewish people had chosen in terms of the commemoration. And that's why, so when this speech is at Yom HaShoah, not International Holocaust Memorial Day. This was the one that the Jewish people would have observed. And I'll just I'll share some of this, and then I'll show you a couple videos of her speaking herself. I am pleased to join hands with all in attendance at this ceremony of remembrance. May I first express abiding appreciation to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum for its vigilant assurance that we will never forget the victims of the Nazi madness, the 6 million Jews killed simply because they were Jews, and the millions of people of other faiths and diverse affiliations swept into the unnatural maelstrom. I had the good fortune to be a Jew born and raised in the USA. My father left Odessa, bound for the New World in 1909 at age 13. My mother was first in her large family to be born here in 1903, just a few months after her parents and older siblings landed in New York. What is the difference between a bookkeeper in New York's garment district and a Supreme Court justice? Just one generation. My mother's life and mine bear witness. Where else but America could that happen? My heritage as a Jew and my occupation as a judge fit together symmetrically. The demand for justice runs through the entirety of Jewish history and Jewish tradition. I take pride in and draw strength from my heritage, as signs in my chambers attest. A large silver mezuzah on my doorpost, gift from the Shulamith School for Girls in Brooklyn. On 3 walls, in artists' renditions of Hebrew letters, The command from Deuteronomy, tzedek, tzedek tirdof, justice, justice shall you pursue. Those words are ever-present reminders of what judges must do that they may thrive. But today, here in the capital, the law-making heart of our nation, in close proximity to the Supreme Court, we remember in sorrow that Hitler's Europe, his Holocaust kingdom, was not lawless. Indeed, it was a kingdom full of laws deployed by highly educated people, teachers, lawyers, and judges to facilitate oppression, slavery, and mass murder. We convene to say never again, not only to Western history's most unjust regime, but also to a world in which good men and women abroad and even in the USA witnessed or knew of the Holocaust kingdom's crimes against humanity and let them happen. The world's failure to stop the atrocities of the Third Reich was perhaps nowhere more apparent than in Hungary, where the Holocaust descended late in the war. But when it came, it advanced with brutal speed. Hungary was the first country in Europe to adopt an anti-Jewish law after World War I, a short-lived measure that restricted the admission of Jews to institutions of higher learning. In the main, however, that nation's 800,000 Jews lived free from terror until 1944. Although 63,000 Hungarian Jews lost their lives before the German occupation, most of them during forced service under dreadful conditions in labor battalions, Hungary's leaders stayed off German demands to carry out the final solution until March 19, 1944, when Hitler's troops occupied the country. Then, overnight, everything changed. Within 3.5 months of the occupation, 437,000 Hungarian Jews were deported. 4 trains a day, each transporting up to 3,000 people, packed together like freight, left Hungary for Auschwitz, where most of the passengers were methodically murdered. This horrendous time is chronicled unforgettably by Hungarian Holocaust survivors and Nobel Prize winners Elie Wiesel, today's lead speaker, and Imre Kertész, and their captivating works, Night and Fateless. What happened to Hungary's Jews is a tragedy beyond reckoning, for unlike earlier deportations, the deportations in Hungary began and relentlessly continued after the tide had turned against the Axis and after the Nazis' crimes against humanity had been exposed. Less than a week after the German occupation of Hungary, President Roosevelt delivered a speech reporting that the wholesale systematic murder of the Jews of Europe goes on unabated every hour, and that Hungarian Jews were now among those threatened with annihilation. Yet, the world, for the most part, did not rise up to stop the killing. I say for the most part because as swiftly as the Hungarian Holocaust happened, heroes emerged. Raoul Wallenberg, a member of Sweden's most prominent banking family, arrived in Budapest in July 1944 and worked with the War Refugee Board established by President Roosevelt just 6 months earlier to protect tens of thousands of Jews from deportation. Wallenberg distributed Swedish protective passports. He purchased or leased buildings, draped them with Swedish flags as diplomatically immune territory, and used them as safe havens for Jews. Through these devices, he was directly responsible for saving 20,000 people. Wallenberg carried food and medical supplies to Jews on forced marches from Budapest to Austria. He sometimes succeeded in removing Jews from the marches by insisting they were protected Swedish citizens. He has been credited with saving some 100,000 Jews in the Budapest ghetto by forestalling attacks on that population by Hungary's anti-Semitic Arrow Cross Party. In January 1945, Wallenberg met with Soviet officials to gain relief for the Budapest Jews. He did not return from that journey. Wallenberg and the War Refugee Board are perhaps the best-known rescuers of Jews trapped in the Hungarian Holocaust. In fact, many others, Jews and Gentiles alike, also rose to the occasion. Some remain unknown for their individual deeds of heroism. Others, including Karl Lutz of Switzerland, saved Jews on a larger scale. All the lifesavers were grand humans, but most of the world stood by in silence. Knowing what a few courageous souls accomplished in Hungary in short time, one can but ask, how many could have been saved throughout Europe had legions of others, both individuals and nations, the United States among them, intervened earlier? I was fortunate to be a Jewish child, safely in America during the Holocaust. Our nation learned from Hitler's racism and in time embarked on a mission to end law-sanctioned discrimination in our own country. In the aftermath of World War II and the civil rights movements of the 1950s and in the 1960s, and the burgeoning women's rights movements of the 1970s, we the people expanded to include all of humankind, to embrace all the people of this great nation. Our motto, E pluribus unum, of many one, signals our appreciation that we are the richer for the religious, ethnic, and racial diversity of our citizens. I am proud to live in a country where Jews are not afraid to say who we are. The second country after Israel to have set aside a day each year, this day, to remember the Holocaust, to learn of and from that era of inhumanity, to renew our efforts to repair the world's tears. I feel the more secure because this capital city includes a museum dedicated to educating the world so that all may know through proof beyond doubt that the unimaginable in fact happened. It is fitting, I hope you agree as I conclude these remarks, to cite another line from Deuteronomy, Uvacharta b'chaim. It means choose life, as did the survivors who somehow managed to stay alive, to carry on and to tell their stories, as did Jews and Christians in ghettos and in camps who gave their lives endeavoring to save the lives of others, as did Budapest itself, where the city's great synagogue still opens its doors, the second largest synagogue in the world, the shul in which Theodor Herzl was bar mitzvahed, a structure so impressive, visitors from my home state might recognize it as the model for Central Synagogue in New York City. We gather here today, little more than a week after Passover, the holiday when Jews recount their journey from slavery to freedom. We retell the Passover just as we commemorate the Holocaust, to educate our children, to remember those who died striving for a better world, and to rejoice in the resistance of the Jewish people to evil fortune, armed with the courage and faith that has enabled them to survive through centuries of exiles, plunderings, and persecutions. The Passover story we retell is replete with miracles, but unlike our ancestors in their exodus from Egypt, our way is unlikely to be advanced by miraculous occurrences. In striving to dry the waters of prejudice and oppression, we must rely on measures of our own creation, upon the wisdom of our laws and the decency of our institutions, upon our reasoning minds and our feeling hearts. It is a constant spark to carry on upon our vivid memories of the evils we wish to banish from the world. In our long struggle for a more just world, our memories are among our most powerful resources. May the memory of those who perished remain vibrant to all who dwell in this fair land, people of every color and creed. May that memory strengthen our resolve to aid those at home and abroad who suffer from injustice born of ignorance and intolerance, to combat crimes that stem from racism and prejudice, and to remain ever engaged in the quest for democracy and respect for the human dignity of the world's people. And I think that, again, her sense of Judaism informing who she is clearly very deep. And I just love that she believes that her work for justice for all is because of her experience of a Jew. It's not about her assimilating out of Judaism. It's coming precisely from the depths of her Jewish soul and her understanding. I'm going to show you something to show that it actually started early with her. Let me see if I can just figure out where I'm going here. Just give me 1 second. I will see if I can find it. No, that's not it. Did something that came up saying List and Ben Showman? Okay, so that was absolutely the wrong screen.
It looks like good music, though.
It's very good. If you're a fan of Liszt, he's a very fine pianist, Ben Schoenman. Here, did it come up something with a picture of RBG? Great.
Yes.
Okay. I'm glad I didn't have I'm glad I didn't have one of my metal albums up. Yeah. So she wrote an essay on the Holocaust when she was 13. And this is, they made a video out of it. I'm going to turn the music off, and it's not her reading it. They put on words, and so I'll read the words as it goes because they're kind of small. But this is the 13-year-old Ruth, just Ruth Bader at the time. So it says in 1946, at the age of 13, she penned this poignant essay on the Holocaust. The war has left a bloody trail and many deep wounds not too easily healed. Many people have been left with scars that take a long time to pass away. We must never forget the horrors which our brethren were subjected to in Bergen-Belsen and other Nazi concentration camps. Then, too, we must try hard to understand that for righteous people, hate and prejudice are neither good occupations nor fit companions. Rabbi Alfred Bettelheim once said, "Prejudice saves us a painful trouble. It saves us from thinking." In our beloved land, families, here, I'm going to pause that so I can read that. In our beloved land, families were not scattered, communities not erased, nor our nation destroyed by the ravages of the World War. Yet dare we be at ease? We are part of a world whose unity has been almost completely shattered. No one can feel free from danger and destruction until the many torn threads of civilization are bound together again. We cannot feel safer until every nation, regardless of weapons or power, will meet together in good faith, the people worthy of mutual association. There can be a happy world, and there will be once again when men create a strong bond towards one another. A bond unbreakable by a studied prejudice or a passing circumstance. Then and only then shall we have a world built on the foundation of the fatherhood of God and whose structure is the brotherhood of man. So again, 13 years old when she wrote that. It would have been impressive at any age, but I thought that was just extraordinary. Here is her discussion of her first experience with anti-Semitism.
Anti-Semitism in America was mostly a matter of custom, tradition, and gentlemen's agreements rather than statute. But it excluded Jews from fully participating in American life.
My first experience with anti-Semitism was a trip with my parents, and just riding along a country road, there was a bed and breakfast, and there was a sign outside, and it read, "No dogs or Jews allowed." I had never seen that before, and that was obviously unsettling.
You couldn't at that point, as a Jew, get a job in any major corporation. If you looked at General Motors, you looked at General Electric, you looked at Westinghouse, you looked at all these companies, there were no Jews working for them. There was an unwritten law that as a Jew, you couldn't go in.
The phrase Christians only was used in many newspaper ads for many jobs and in many social situations. It was not something that a lot of people were embarrassed about in the 1920s and 30s.
I was playing in a club, at the Kentucky Club in Cincinnati. In between the shows, I walk around and watch them gamble. And I looked over there, and the guy was playing a slot machine, the dollar slot machine. This guy was playing and playing and losing and losing and losing. And then he had the last dollar, and he took it, and he put it in and dropped it, and he put his hand over the machine, pulled it. Nothing. All right, you Jew bastard, I'll be back.
And let me share a video where she talks about issues of anti-Semitism on the Supreme Court. Oh, here, let me get the.
Anti-Semitism
I was
in
right the
America.
first time.
In 1916, President Woodrow Wilson touched off a furor when he nominated the first Jew to the Supreme Court. Louis Brandeis was called the people's lawyer. He had distinguished himself defending trade unions, advocating for women's suffrage, assailing giant corporations. But for some, his religion was even more troubling than his progressive views.
Brandeis was a brilliant man who had a tremendous caring for the nation's most fundamental values. Wilson was certain that he wanted Brandeis on the court, but there were anti-Semites in the Senate at the time.
In spite of bitter opposition, Brandeis was confirmed and soon became one of the court's most influential jurists. But he continued to confront anti-Semitism from within the court itself.
Justice McReynolds was just an out-and-out anti-Semite, and he treated this brilliant man with total disdain. When Brandeis would speak at a court conference, McReynolds routinely would stand up and leave the room. And one year there was no official portrait of the court because McReynolds refused to stand next to Justice Brandeis. Brandeis ignored it. Dignity is the right word to describe his response to that bigotry.
Brandeis was an American Jew, but he had come late to a sense of his Jewish identity, which is what would make his story so unusual. Anti-Semitism.
This next one, I want to show her connection to Israel. There were people there. She had expressed some concerns about some of Israel's policy and some people in the Israeli government. And as you know, the most vicious critics of Israel are actually other Israelis. But because she had said a word that was criticizing some policies of Israel, people branded her as an anti-Zionist and a self-hating Jew and all those other things, which are absolutely and completely inaccurate. And I can show you this because she was actually awarded one of Israel's top prizes by the Israeli government.
Welcome to the station. On Thursday night, U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg attended a screening in Jerusalem of RBG, a documentary which tells the story of her fight for women's rights leading up to 1993, when she would be nominated as the second female justice ever to serve in the Supreme Court, and focuses on her legacy to the present day. Jerusalem was just one of the stops during her 5th trip to Israel after she received the Genesis Lifetime Achievement Award at a special ceremony in Tel Aviv. Eve. It was a ceremony that paid tribute to her life, honoring her for her legal work for civil liberties and women's rights. During the ceremony, Ginsburg would touch upon her Jewish heritage, which she has referred to as a driving force behind her love for learning and sensitivity for the difficulties faced by oppressed minorities. She would also mention Anne Frank's questioning of gender inequality as an inspiration behind her fight to open doors for women to work in fields that were once closed to them.
I was heartened by the words of a girl of my generation. She wrote, "One of the many questions that has often bothered me is why women have been and still are thought to be so inferior to men."
And that demand for justice will continue, with the 85-year-old having no plans for retirement anytime soon.
I am a judge, born, raised, and proud of being a Jew. The demand for justice, for peace, for enlightenment runs through the entirety of the Jewish history and Jewish tradition. I hope that in all the years I have the good fortune to continue serving on the bench of the Supreme Court of the United States, I will have the strength and courage to remain steadfast in service of that demand.
While the ceremony has come to an end, the legacy and impact of this extraordinary woman will go on. Erica Jackson, I-24 News.
Yeah, so that was, and you notice that was her 5th trip to Israel. So for someone branded an anti-Zionist to go to Israel 5 times and get a prize from the Israeli government, maybe she isn't. In fact, here, this was, I thought this was a very cute video that I found.
Cole, he's my miracle child. So how does your miracle child get cancer?
It's called Ramat HaShofet, the height of the judge's heights.
Kibbutz Ramat HaShofet decided to honor RBG and change the name of the kibbutz from Ramat HaShofet to Ramat HaShofetet. Ramat HaShofetet means the judge, the female judge. We decided to change the name for 1 week because we honor and cherish RBG legacy and her contribution to the justice and equality in America. And this was also some of the ideas that Judge Julian Mack, which is the kibbutz originally named after, promoted and did all his life.
So today we planted this vineyard here in Ramat HaShofet, or Ramat HaShofetet, on the memory of RBG. And we decided to name this vineyard Ruth Vineyard on her name and to her honor. It was the decision of this morning, actually, when we just signed the papers for the plants. I decided to name the vineyard Ruth. I hope this vineyard will be as important and as interesting as RBG.
So I thought that was just a very cool thing that, you know, just that her reach really went to Israel, and they really understood who she was. I'm going to share now part of a discussion she had with someone about the value of dissent.
you became quite famous for your dissents. There's been a long period of time where you're the most senior of the four more liberal members of the court. There was a time, I think about 10 or 11 years ago, when Linda Greenhouse, the New York Times, wrote an article on the front page of the New York Times where she said that that term will be remembered as when you found your voice. And I think it was probably either the Ledbetter case or maybe the VMI case. But explain, and a bench dissent is when a justice Supreme Court actually reads from the dissent, when the court is announcing its decision.
A summary.
From some of it. When you do that, who is your audience? You're obviously, the majority already disagreed with you. Are you speaking to the future? Are you speaking to Congress? Are you assuming that, like the great dissents of Justices Holmes and Brandeis, that the day will come when your dissent will be the law of the land? What leads you to want to read a dissent like that?
I will announce a dissent from the bench if I think that the court not only got it wrong, but egregiously wrong. And sometimes those dissents are addressed to Congress, as was true in the Lilly Ledbetter case. The bottom line of my dissent in that case was the ball is now in Congress's court to correct the error into which the court has fallen. And in very short order, Congress, with overwhelming majorities, amended Title VII so that it said with unmistakable clarity what I thought it meant all along. It reminded me of an earlier incident when the Supreme Court in the 70s said discrimination on the basis of pregnancy is not discrimination on the basis of sex. Again, there was a coalition, and by a large majority, Congress passed the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, which is the soul of simplicity. It simply says, discrimination on the basis of pregnancy is discrimination on the basis of sex. And in Lilly Ledbetter's case, well, every woman of a certain age knows what she experienced. That is, she was an area manager at a Goodrich tire plant. When she was hired, was the only woman area manager. One day, when she'd been working there over a dozen years, someone put a slip of paper in her mailbox. It had a series of numbers. The numbers were the salaries of all of the area managers. And Lily could see that the young man she had recently trained was earning more money than she was. So she said, enough, I'm going to sue. She got a substantial jury verdict. And then when her case came to the court, they said, she sued too late. Title VII says, you must complain within 180 days of the discriminatory incident. Lilly Ledbetter is way out of time. She waited years to sue. My theory was that every time she got a paycheck, the paycheck incorporated the discrimination, so she could sue 180 days from any paycheck. I also pointed out that what would have happened had Lilly Ledbetter sued early on. No doubt the defense would have been It has nothing to do with Lily being a woman. She just doesn't do the job as well. But then she works there year after year and she gets good performance ratings. That defense is no longer available. They can't say she doesn't do the job as well as the men when they rated her as high or higher than the men. So now she has a winning case. But the court said she waited too long. So that kind of dissent, if the court is interpreting a statute like Title VII, then Congress can fix it. But when the court is making a ruling on a constitutional matter, Congress can't fix it. Only an amendment to the Constitution, and we have a Constitution that's powerfully hard to amend, or the court has to change its mind. But there has been a tradition in the United States of dissents becoming the law of the land. We can go back to the worst decision the Supreme Court ever made. It was in the Dred Scott case. There was a fine dissent by Justice Curtis in that case. Or the first Justice, John Marshall Harlan, who dissented in the so-called civil rights cases in 1886 and in Plessy against Ferguson. Or you mentioned Holmes and Brandeis around the time of World War I. Those free speeches cases today are all the law of the land. So you're writing for a future age, and your hope is that with time, the court will see it the way you do.
So I love this on a lot of levels. And aside from the fact of her,
you booked a sunny
oh, sorry.
Bergman
Let me just
with endless views of snow-covered peaks.
What I love here is, again, that sense of tzedek, tzedek tirdof. You have to pursue justice no matter what, even if the other justices aren't pursuing justice. That sense of standing up, that sense of dissent is so powerfully Jewish. I love the fact that she was influenced by Anne Frank and this idea of, it wasn't the Pollyannish, all people are good, which is what we tend to remember Anne Frank. What Anne Frank was talking about was the sense of discrimination, the sense of unfairness, and to be inspired by that. And it's an incredibly Talmudic way of thinking about things, very, very clearly informed by an understanding of how Jewish learning works. The Talmud isn't a book of rulings. The Talmud is a book of thinking about things, and it incorporates losing decisions that lost in their own time, but became Jewish law in later generations. And she understood that you might lose a case in the present, but you might win it in the future if you give the words to it, and that sense of power and that sense of justice will eventually come through. She had a sense, because she was Jewish, that she wasn't just making decisions now, she was making them for the future. And that her voice would eventually be heard, even if the other justices didn't hear it at the time. And so what I wanted to kind of show is that her understanding of being Jewish actually does impact her sense of justiceness, her sense of justice. I want to share a couple of documents that I thought were very powerful. Actually, just one document in particular, because we're coming toward the end, and then I'll show a couple of her own discussions about this issue. Did you see where it says measured motions and third branch decision making? Okay, so this is from NYU Law Review. She submitted an article which part of it deals with Roe v. Wade, but it shows a lot of her philosophy. Now, I read through this article. I don't understand every bit of it. It is a long article. It was written for Law Review. But just to get a sense of how deeply she thinks about things. And so, I wanted to share her own words. So, moving from the style to the substance of third branch decision-making, I will stress in the remainder of these remarks, the judges play an interdependent part in our democracy. They do not alone shape legal doctrine, but as I suggested at the outset, they participate in a dialogue with other organs of government and with the people as well. Judges do and must legislate, Justice Holmes recognized without hesitation, but they can do so, he cautioned, only interstitially. They are confined from molar to molecular motions. Measured motions seem to me right in the main for constitutional as well as common law adjudication. Doctrinal limbs too swiftly shaped experience teaches may prove unstable. The most prominent example in recent decades is Roe v. Wade. To illustrate my point, I have contrasted that breathtaking 1973 decision with the court's more cautious dispositions contemporaneous with Roe in cases involving explicitly sex-based classifications, and will further develop their comparison here. This is a very strong idea behind Jewish law. There is a concept, and this is why Hillel is more successful than Shammai, who said you only make the laws that the people can follow and that the people can handle. And this was actually her concern with Roe v. Wade. It says the 7-2 judgment in Roe v. Wade declared violative of the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, a Texas criminal abortion statute that intolerably shackled a woman's autonomy. The Texas law accepted from criminality only a life-saving procedure on behalf of the pregnant woman. Suppose the court had stopped there, rightly declaring unconstitutional the most extreme brand of law in the nation, and had not gone on, as the court did in Roe, to fashion a regime blanketing the subject, a set of rules that displaced virtually every state law then in force. Would there have been the 20-year controversy we have witnessed, reflected most recently in the Supreme Court's splintered decision in Planned Parenthood versus Casey? A less encompassing Roe, one that merely struck down the extreme Texas law and went no further on that day, I believe, and will summarize why, might have served to reduce rather than to fuel controversy. And she continues to go on, but her concern with Roe v. Wade is that it didn't work well as law. You know, she was very, very committed to women's reproductive rights, but she felt it was going too far too soon and was restricting states. And that her belief was that that is actually what caused a lot of the controversy. So I'm going to share just her, again, I want to make sure I share as possible her own words about these issues.
You became quite famous.
Let me just...
Imagine energy abundance with no trade-offs, no downtime, and no...
When President Clinton became president, you were obviously somebody being considered. And then President Clinton talked to somebody who was pushing for your appointment, Daniel Patrick Moynihan. And President Clinton said, well, women don't want her. Now, how could that have been the case when you were the leading lawyer in gender discrimination? Why would women have not wanted you, or some women not wanted you on the Supreme Court?
Just some women. Most women were overwhelmingly supportive of my nomination. But I had written a comment on Roe v. Wade, and it was not 100% applauding that decision. What I said was, the court court had an easy target because the Texas law was the most extreme in the nation. Abortion could be had only if necessary to save the woman's life. Doesn't matter that her health would be ruined, that she was the victim of rape or incest. I thought Roe v. Wade was an easy case, and the Supreme Court could have held that most extreme law unconstitutional and put down its pen. Instead, the court wrote an opinion that made every abortion restriction in the country illegal in one fell swoop. And that was not the way that the court ordinarily operates. You know, it waits till the next case and the next case. Anyway, it was that some women felt that I should have been 100% in favor of Roe v. Wade, and because I wasn't.
You became quite...
So I love the fact that she would dissent even with people who agreed with her. You know, that she really, you know, just had such a deep way of thinking. Here's another one of her discussions.
Much time focused on the importance of reproductive rights for women. You've also written that the law is something like a pendulum. Are you concerned that maybe in some respects the pendulum could be actually swinging backwards when you think, for example, of the restrictions on women's ability, for example, to access abortions in many states now, where it's almost impossible in many states. They have to travel, they can't afford to. Or are you concerned about possibly the law actually moving backwards in some of the things that you fought so hard for?
Yes, but not for women like me, or most of you. Not because I'm well past childbearing, but because if truth be told, there is no woman of means in the United States who will not be able to get a safe abortion if she wants one. All of the restrictions that we see in states like Texas operate only against poor women. In the Texas case we had a couple of years ago, it was obvious that the clinic in Dallas would stay in Houston, but the people who were far from the big cities and couldn't afford to take a day off from work, the restrictive abortion laws operate against poor women, and that's the sad story. We will never go back to the way it was before Roe v. Wade because there are a number of states. At the time of Roe v. Wade, there were 4 states that provided abortion in the first trimester, no questions asked. Alaska, Hawaii, New York, California. Those states will not go back to the way it was. So it is a sad reality that any attempt to restrict abortion is going to affect only the poorest segment of the population.
And now there are even suggestions that perhaps Medicaid funding for even contraception could be restricted. Could you imagine that theoretically as an equal protection problem if contraception itself was precluded under Medicaid?
I had always thought that Roe v. Wade was put under the wrong heading. It should not have been due process. It should have been equal protection, the woman's right to choose for herself, to determine her life's course, her own destiny.
America's most reliable.
Yeah. So I thought that was a brilliant distinction, and I'm hoping that those her words continue. It is true. One of the comments in chat is that even women of means were not able to because they were restricted by their husbands, which is why she really does talk about the idea that equal protection was the issue. She had talked to in other places that she was concerned that Roe v. Wade actually was more about protecting doctors than women, and that it had sort of gone in the different way. And she felt this idea of equal protection, that women would not be able to participate in society if safe and legal abortions were not available. But again, just that sense of sensitivity to those who were poor, this idea of tzedek tirdof. She was going to, even if it was difficult, she was going to think about all the ways you could be compassionate and do the right thing. And again, this was just a few years ago, and she clearly wasn't feeling great there, and she was still going out and speaking and incredibly sharp, because she just had this passion for justice, and that America had to stand for justice. And that's why she didn't want to let go. And I thought the pressure for her to retire, I thought, was really unfair. She was on the ball till the day she died, and you never know what else could have happened. She is truly one of the most extraordinary American lives. But I also wanted to show she was so deeply informed by being Jewish, that all of her thought process, the way she thought about law, the way she thought about being the child of immigrants, the way she thought about being a contemporary of Anne Frank, the fact that she had all over her office, she had a mezuzah and tzedek tirdof, that she had been to Israel 5 times and was honored by Israel. And so I would argue that Justice Ginsburg was so deeply Jewish, and that any criticism of her not being Jewish enough, whoever's doing the criticism needs to look in the mirror to figure out what that means. She is not just an American hero, but she truly is a Jewish hero as well. And I think we should just be very grateful. So why don't we, I said this, do you think she would like Nazis to be called Nazis and not, I can't speak for her thought about Nazis. I'm pretty sure she's against them. But the idea of neo-Nazi and who's a Nazi, that's, she was horrified by what happened, that I can tell you. She was just simply horrified by what was happening, regardless. But she stood up for everything that America is supposed to be about. So I appreciate very, very much your joining in, and thank you to Jody for facilitating, and have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi, for joining us. Thank you, everyone. We're so lucky that Rabbi shared his knowledge and interest in RBG today. And as always, there's a lot going on at Adat Shalom. So if you would bear with me just to check it out, what's going on, so that I send out information on Sundays at 3:30 every Sunday, and Susie Steinberg sends information out on Fridays, and which really pertain to Shabbat and Sundays. Rabbi Bergman is teaching a very interesting class, and somebody asked me today, why is he teaching a class on women reading Talmud? And it was an interesting question, because to me it just seems natural, because